Hi, welcome to the Indie Wine Podcast. My name is Matt Wood, and this is episode 64. Today I'm talking with Brad Kurtz of Vine Farm Ridge and Gloria Ferrer. Vine Farm Ridge is Brad and his family's new project in the Livermore Valley. He has lots of great info and insight into the area from his previous work with Winty Vineyards there. He's also the director of vineyards for Gloria Ferrer and can tell us all about farming in Carneros for sparkling and some still wines. A quick reminder that there's a Patreon at patreon.com/indiewinepodcast. The link is in the show notes also. Any amount to help me keep telling wine stories ad-free and available for everyone is appreciated. Telling a friend is a great way to help out too. Here we go. What got you started in wine? Where'd your interest start?
So let's see. So the wine industry, the way I kind of made my way into it is I started at Cal Poly. So
Okay.
I was actually an environmental management major at Cal Poly. I thought it was going to be something more different than it was. It was very policy based. It was very compliance based, things like that, studying those sorts of things versus the science, the hands-on. I'm a very hands-on person. I get my hands dirty. I love getting my hands dirty.
Yeah.
I like to be outside. And I took a soil science class as part of that major. And, it's just the entry-level 101 or whatever it was class. And I fell in love with it. I thought it was really, really cool. And I decided to switch my major, and I, went headfirst into soil science. There was about 6 soil science majors in my graduating class.
Okay.
So not a very popular major, believe it or
Right.
not. Not a lot of 18 to 22-year-olds really interested in, spending their time in soil pits and studying dirt. But it was I really enjoyed it. Trying to figure out what to do with that. You find something that you're passionate about, but you need to obviously find a way to make a living off of it.
Yeah.
And so I had a buddy whose family worked for a brew vineyard management up in Napa.
Okay.
So, really, really phenomenal vineyard management company. They manage some of the most legendary vineyards in Napa Valley. Did I know that at the time? No, I didn't, and so they actually invited me to come, work up there with them. And it was not glamorous work.
Okay.
We were shoveling weeds, dropping fruit, pulling leaves, shoot thinning, all that kind of sort of stuff. I got to experience my first harvest there. I spent most of my time at Screaming Eagle, which was not a bad place to, get your first experience in the wine biz. And so I really fell in love with it. I thought, it's hard work, but it's really cool. It's really cool to see the final thing. There's this kind of glamour aspect to it. I could go into farming and we could farm anything. But at the end of the day, it's a lot better to be in the wine industry where there's a fun product at the end. There's a social aspect to it. There's nuance to it versus just farming lettuce or almonds or something along those lines. So I really started to dive into it. My now wife, Allie, and her father, Don, who we can talk about them a little bit later, but Don's a huge wine drinker. He's got a beautiful wine collection, and he was she was then at that point my girlfriend. He would spoil us with all kinds of fantastic wines. And so I got spoiled also, when I was young, at a young age, with some phenomenal wines that, really help, instead of drinking, bagged wines or $2 Czech, I got to drink some phenomenal, world-renowned Napa Valley Cabernets. And that really helped, help me fall in love with it and decide this is what I want to dedicate my career and life to.
Yeah, you get that wine education going with some nice wines. Was the Breu management, was that kind of like an internship thing, or is it something you stayed on?
I wouldn't even call it an internship.
Okay.
I would call it like I was a field worker on their crew. I was one of a couple guys that didn't speak, everyone else didn't speak English. I was, you learn Spanish very quickly when you're out in the field and you're surrounded and immersed in it. But it's, one of those things where I was just a field worker and I don't even know that I tried any of the wines while I was there. I was so low on the totem pole, but being around it and getting to experience it and, have those aha moments and ask a lot of questions. I was able to, pick the vineyard managers and the viticulturists brains about, hey, why are we doing this? Why are we dropping fruit on the ground? This is some expense. I had the concept that Screaming Eagle is an extremely expensive bottle of wine. Why are you guys dropping fruit on the ground? Why are we pulling leaves? What are we doing this for? So being able to ask those questions. Later, I did do some structured internships later in my college career where I got to actually, learn and develop and do a structured internship. But sometimes those more hands-on experiences, you learn a lot. I think it's benefited me, being able to do that kind of stuff, and having done that kind of stuff benefits me. I'm not scared to get my hands dirty. My crew loves it. I'll jump in. I also work at Gloria Ferrer up in Sonoma, and, my crew there, I jump in with them and I'll prune with them. We'll shovel weeds. We'll do whatever we got to do, and I jump in there with them, and I'm not, not afraid to get my hands dirty at all. And, I'll mess around with them and spend some time out in the vineyards. And I think that's the best way to learn what's going on is, you can walk vineyards all you want, but getting your hands dirty and actually working in there is how you see the problems, how you fix problems, and how you improve your viticulture.
Yeah, it seems great to have that experience, like hands-on, getting dirty and getting in there. Where did you go after the Abreu intern? I spent some time. I did an internship up in Alexander Valley and Russian River Valley, and for Simi and Clos de Bois. Okay.
So with Constellation Brands. So that was like, going from like boutique high-end to more like corporate, larger wineries. They have some phenomenal vineyards out there. Landslide Vineyards, beautiful vineyard. I got to learn for some really cool people that I actually still interact with to this day in the industry, that were able to mentor me a little bit and give me some knowledge, pass on some knowledge to me. And, they do everything from, the bulk, or at the time they had Clos de Bois, which was like 3 million cases of Chardonnay. Right. So you got everything from that all the way up to some, $100 Cabernets and Bordeaux blends that were phenomenal wines that Simi was putting out. So they have a little bit and at that point they even had Ravenswood. So they were, doing... Okay. Yeah. They had Zinfandels that they were doing, some really high-end Zinfandels. So, I got kind of exposed to all aspects of the spectrum. And then after that, I graduated and I came to Wente, which very similar. They have a huge stretch of what they do, between Livermore Valley and Monterey County down south. They do, I think when I first started there, it was like 30 varietals that we were farming commercially. So it was, a lot of experience. You got to farm a lot of different varietals, warmer climate in Livermore, cooler climate varietals down in Monterey County and Arroyo Seco. So that was another great experience. And I ended up spending close to 5 years there, really cutting my teeth and getting to experiment and play around with stuff. The Wente family is, awesome with innovation. They're always looking for the newest technology, the newest gadgets, newest pruning or whatever it is to play around with. And so I got exposed to a lot of cool stuff and a lot of stuff that I've taken throughout my career. So.
Did you spend most of your time in Livermore or more down in Arroyo Seco?
Definitely based I lived in Livermore, so obviously Livermore is a lot easier for me to get to. And I spent most of my time probably. I think by the end of my time at Wente, I was up here 3 days a week and down there 2 days a week.
Okay.
But there's a good chunk where I barely ever went down there, in the beginning, just trying to get my hands around this animal that was like the 2,000 acres that they were farming in the Livermore Valley. So, yeah. It's a very expansive operation. They have their hands in a lot of pots and it's a lot to learn. So in the beginning, I spent most of my time up here in Livermore.
I mean, obviously they have a lot of Chardonnay and Sauvignon Blanc and Cabernet. Also, was there anything that you were kind of concentrating on in your farming as far as
when I was at Wente? Obviously, Chardonnay's king at Wente. Wente is the first family of Chardonnay. They were the ones that really helped popularize California Chardonnay and help bring it to all of the wineries in California. So Chardonnay is king. I mean, I think they did double the amount of Chardonnay, don't quote me on this, but double the amount of Chardonnay that they did almost anything else. It was, about a third of what we did up in Livermore, and then probably half of what we did down in Monterey County was planted to Chardonnay. The other third in Livermore was probably Cabernet with a third of other stuff. And then down in Monterey County, probably around close to half of the other stuff was Pinot Noir. So, it was a lot of different things. And so, you got to learn, how to farm Chardonnay in a warmer climate, how to farm it in a cooler climate. They have some very, very old vineyards planted in the 60s, which for Chardonnay and Pinot Noir vineyards planted in the 60s just don't really exist. Those 60 plus year old vineyards for Chardonnay and Pinot Noir are very rare. So, getting to experience all different kinds of trellis styles, farming styles, what different root stocks do in different soils. When you farm at a small operation, you get to see one thing.
Sure.
But when you farm it, and I always recommend this to people that come through our internship program or at Gloria Ferrer, or anyone that I meet that wants advice, I say, go work for a big company. Even if you don't want to be at a big company long term, they will give you the experience you will see a lot more in a large company versus a small winery where you're seeing maybe one soil type, a couple different varietals. They have one way of doing anything. At Wente or even Constellation, those are huge companies that are really have their fingers in a lot of different soils, vineyards, varietals, farming styles, and you'll learn a lot, and you'll get your money's worth, if you will, really in one internship or in, a couple harvests. You'll be able to see a lot more than you will working for a small winery. So I always recommend that to people. Should we pop open some wine?
Sure. Yeah, that sounds great.
All right. So I brought from Gloria Ferrer. We can start, obviously we want to start with some bubbles.
Yeah.
I brought our 2021 Sencia, which is a Blanc de Blanc, Brut Nature. So it's a 0 dosage Blanc de Blanc. This is, I brought the 21 because that was my first year at Gloria.
Okay.
So it's, exciting to finally, these are all traditional method sparkling wines at Gloria Ferrer. So I always, it's painful because you have to wait so long before this is kind of like one of the first wines that we've disgorged from my first vintage, and it's, almost 4 years later. So it's one of those things where you really have to have some patience. Everything in the wine industry is about patience, but sparkling wine, traditional method sparkling wine is not if you're impatient, it's not the business to be in, because these wines sit down for a long time. So these are kind of just like the first 2021s. It's when we started transitioning to organic farming, the first vintage, where we were implementing, the organic farming systems. But really a phenomenal wine. And we talk about it all the time at Gloria Ferrer, but the first year, that 2021, the difference between the 2019s, 2020s, and then the 2021s and 2022s is like mind-blowing, because the vines just come so much more into balance when they're farmed organically. You can't bump up the yield. Well, you could, but it's a lot more difficult to bump up those yields. Pinot Noir doesn't want to be at 6 tons per acre. Right. There's no natural way for you to do that in an organic system. So your vines, your Chardonnay comes much more into balance. And the wines just have so much more structure, so much more mouth coat, so much longer finish. And it's just phenomenal. We've been able to, lower the dosage level. So, when traditionally Gloria Ferrer's sparkling wines have been, maybe 10 to 12 grams per liter, we've been able to look at lower dosage levels. And this is a great example of that. This has 0 sugar added. This is bone dry, and it's just got so much weight and so much mouth coat, such a long finish. You don't need that sugar. Sugar's brought in there because sparkling wine has such high acidity that if it doesn't have that structure and body to build around the acidity, that it's like lemon juice, making lemonade, you need to add a little sugar to balance out that lemon juice. And this wine being bone dry, it's just, you wouldn't even know, because it's got so much structure and body.
Yeah, it's really beautiful wine.
Yeah, that's a favorite of mine. That's one I've been drinking a lot of lately.
So you went from kind of farming in a couple different areas, a lot of different varieties, and then to Gloria Ferrer, where we're kind of
sparkling wine
Carneros.
I got to dial in. We got estate vineyards. We've got 2 estate vineyards. It's 330 acres. I got to really go from a wide, birth of what I'm doing to really dial in and focus on almost exclusively sparkling wine production from Chardonnay and Pinot Noir from these two, from what I was coming from, small vineyards. They're not small vineyards. We have a 205 acre ranch and a 125 acre ranch. So they're not small by a lot of standards, but from what I was coming from, this is much smaller. And I can really focus in. At Wente, I was lucky to be able to see every block once a week, versus here I can do a vineyard drive and I can see every block every day. I can really dial in. I can really focus. We have our own team. We don't use any vineyard management services. So I have a year-round team of about 20 crew members that a lot of them have been there 20 plus years.
That's awesome.
A lot of them planted these vineyards. They know vine by vine. If I ask them to do something, it clicks right away. They know why I'm asking them to do it. And so we can really dial in. And, I've asked them in the last 4 vintages to make a lot of huge changes. We have a lot of goals at Gloria Ferrer to try and, produce the best sparkling wines we can. And we understand that starts in the vineyard. And you have to reevaluate how you're doing everything, especially when you're transitioning to organic. We're applying for our certification right now. So this is fresh in my head, of all the things we've had to do. I had to put together my whole, records of everything I've done for the last 3 years in the vineyards. It's like an Excel sheet that's 18,000 lines. So it's quite an operation, and it's quite a change we've had to make to go from this more traditional, conventional approach to farming vineyards to go to this ultra premium approach. And we've really seen a dramatic increase in the quality of the wine. So it's fun because I've gotten to dive in and really focus, learn. We made sparkling wines at Wente. They're great, but this is something where being a specialist in something and getting to really dive deep. I'm a nerdy guy. I'm reading the research papers. I'm doing experiments out in the vineyard. We're trying to make the best possible wine that we possibly can off of our estate vineyards. And, we're lucky. I inherited a lot of great stuff at Gloria Ferrer, where there's a lot of clonal research that was done. They imported a lot of sparkling wine clones from Champagne back in the 80s, 90s, 2000s. So we have this huge library of knowledge that I can tap into that was all done on our estate vineyards. They partnered with UC Davis, a lot of rootstock work, stuff like that. When I came in, Alberto Robledo was our vineyard manager. He was there up until this was his last harvest before he retired. He's had like 50 harvests under his belt, but he's another one of those guys where I was able to tap into his, 50 years of experience where he can, go back and say, these chemicals, all these stuff that we use out in the vineyards didn't exist in the 70s, This is all relatively new. All of the, what we call conventional farming today, everything was done organically back then for the most part. And so when we are, reinventing the wheel, we're just really going back to how we were doing it prior to this kind of industrialization of farming. So being able to tap into these guys that have this experience going back so far, they remember when we didn't spray under the vines, we just had, hoe plows and French plows and weed knives and we were shoveling weeds under vines, and that's how we controlled the weeds. They remember, hey, we didn't have synthetic fungicides. We just dusted sulfur out there and it worked. It worked, and it wasn't never a problem. It was never a thought. And then slowly these chemicals started to get introduced, and that became the norm. But we're essentially just, when we're farming organically, we're essentially going back to the way it was, 30, 40 years ago. And, you have to look at everything a little bit differently than what you may be used to. So
did that transition to organic, did that start before you arrived at Gloria Ferrer, or were you kind of the one that
I was brought in to take the lead on that transition? It's not something I have done before. I worked on the organic farm at Cal Poly a little bit, but I'd never farmed a vineyard organically before this. So I was hired by my prior boss, brought me in to lead the transition to organic. That was one of her goals. And so we started that transition in 2021, and now we are hopefully by the beginning of 2025 going to be CCOF certified. That's our goal. But it's a long, like I said, nothing in farming comes quick.
Sure.
A 3-year transition. We've been farming following organic principles for 3 years. And you still can't even say we're organic because you have to be certified before you can say we're organic. But we're still seeing the benefits in the wine.
Sure.
So that's the great part, is that even in 2025, when our grapes, hopefully, knock on wood, will be certified organic, you're not going to see those wines for another 3 years after that.
Yeah.
So it's a long process. So something that started in 2021, you're going to see for the first time in 2028, maybe.
Right.
It's one of those things where everything takes some patience in the wine industry. You can't snap your fingers and have everything. So if you're doing it the right way and being patient and, it really does take a long time to get to that point.
What are some of the unique things that you've learned about farming in the Carneros region, and I guess specifically for sparkling?
So for sparkling wine, Carneros has two things that, Livermore Valley is a windy place. I thought I knew how to handle wind in the vineyard, and then I started working at Gloria Ferrer, where on a light day, you have 20-mile-an-hour winds every day in the afternoon. And it can be gusts up to 40, 50 miles an hour.
Wow. Okay.
So, I've developed my first vineyard there, and I put in these big cross arms, trying to open up the canopy, help with disease management, help shade the fruit. And I was thinking, oh yeah, this is the right thing to do. I'm like, I can't believe they've been doing it this way with these tight canopies. And I got a reality check real quick, because the wind came and it wasn't holding those shoots in tight, and we were snapping shoots left and right, and we lost about probably 20-30% of our yield from that block on the first vintage, because I was kind of arrogant and I thought, the right thing to do is to open up the canopy. That's what I learned. That's what I've seen. It improves quality, helps with disease management, all this stuff. And then boom, those winds come and really change everything. But the winds are important there because you get the fog in the morning. The fog burns off. It starts to heat up. And as it starts to heat up, and especially, to the east in Napa Valley, or even further east in the Central Valley, the warm air pulls the cold air from the Pacific Ocean right over the top of us. And we're tucked up against a hillside. So it's like putting your thumb over a garden hose, and it really speeds up those winds because we're tucked up against that hill. Okay. And it cools us down really dramatically. I mean, if you look at the weather station data, it's like cold in the morning, starts to heat up, gets, 70, 80, maybe 90 degrees. And then around 3 or 4 o'clock, those winds kick in, and it drops 10 to 15 degrees when those winds kick in. And you can smell the ocean it's salty. The breeze is salty because there's no real topography between, we have this little hill behind us, and then there's no real topography between us and the Pacific Ocean. So it's really something we need for part of our terroir, but it's something you have to deal with, is that wind. The other would be the goals for farming. Your goals for still wine are generally different than your goals for sparkling wine. For Pinot Noir, most of our wines, we're drinking a Blanc de Blanc 100% Chardonnay right now, but most of Gloria Ferrer's wines are Pinot Noir dominant sparkling wines, which is different from most of the other sparkling wine producers in California. Most people are based around Chardonnay. We love the fruit and the elegance that Pinot Noir brings to a blend. But Pinot Noir is very difficult for sparkling wine, especially if you're treating it like still wine, because still wine, your goal is color, tannin, you need higher alcohol, you need lower acidity. For sparkling wine, our goals are completely different. We want 0 tannin. We want 0 to very little color. Maybe you're making a rosé, but typically you're wanting very little color, if any at all. You need screaming acids. Chardonnay does a much better job of holding onto its acidity than Pinot Noir does. So you really have to farm with the goal of retaining acidity, keeping that pH really low. And so it's one of those things where you have to think about things differently, right? If I'm growing Cabernet in Napa Valley, I'm going to want to stress my vines to a certain point. I want to shut down the growth. I want them to start having a little stress, especially between like fruit set and veraison. You want to keep those berries small. You want to keep that skin to juice ratio high. You want to increase, you get some light in there to develop anthocyanins and color and tannin and start binding those tannins to those anthocyanins, so they're stable in your wine, and your wine can have huge aging potential. We don't want any of that for sparkling wine.
Mm-hmm.
You look at the places that the iconic sparkling wines of the world are grown. They are very cold, wet places. You're looking, obviously everyone's mind goes directly to Champagne. Champagne, if you've ever been there, in July, it's like 75 degrees and it rains 3 times a week, and you have these deep, chalky clay soils that hold a ton of water. The vines are never stressed. Mm-hmm. I mean, maybe with climate change, that's changing a little bit, but historically, those vines do not experience stress. They hedge them several times a year. They grow and grow and grow. So our goal is to sort of emulate that, have thinner skins, less tannin, less color. I'm trying to avoid any sun exposure. I'm not trying to develop that tannin. Sunburn is my worst enemy. In 2022, I had a few blocks that got some sunburn. I went through and I dropped most of the fruit. There was one block I wasn't able to get to in time to drop fruit. We picked it with the sunburn, and it was crazy how apparent it was in the wine. I mean, it was bitter and astringent. Right. So having that in mind, you need to be able to be very careful. Sparkling wine, there is nowhere to hide, right? Mm-hmm. If your wine has flaws, it's apparent right away. There's no oak, there's no malolactic, there's, it's a very naked wine, especially in something like this. It's a 0 dosage. You can't even hide behind sugar. Right. It is a very, very naked wine. So, your goals are different. You want those deep soils. So we have these deep clay loam soils in Carneros, which are just phenomenal, especially on the Sonoma side where we are. We have these phenomenal deep clay loam soils, which just hold tons of water. We don't have to irrigate a massive amount because all that rain is captured and we're able to lock it into the soil, and the vines can tap into that all season long. Every time we irrigate, because we're farming an organic system, every time we irrigate, we're irrigating weeds, which then becomes a challenge because you can't just rely on an herbicide spray, right? When you're in a conventional system, irrigation is kind of an afterthought. You just turn on the water, right? If you want water, you turn it on. You don't think about it too much. Right. I have to be really careful when we turn on the water, because if I turn on the water, I'm irrigating the vines, yes, but I'm also irrigating the weeds. And that means we need to have the tractor come through. That means I probably have to have the crew come through and shovel weeds. So we have the goal of low water stress, but we also have to be careful about our irrigation because we can't rely on a spray to control the weeds. Mm-hmm. So it's a lot of things that you have to learn very quickly.
Right. How one system kind of impacts the other ones down the line.
It's a huge learning curve,
Yeah. I've heard some smaller producers and others I've talked to say with sparkling in particular, the window is just so small. Like that's one of their kind of stress point for harvest, where you just have days. You don't have a wider window.
Days, okay. Yeah, it's one of those things where it's that's absolutely correct, because and for us, we're a state grown 330 acres of Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. So we have 2 varietals. Mm-hmm. We're about 60% Pinot, 40% Chardonnay. We have these 2 varietals that are, both our ranches are a mile apart. They're not hugely different. We're lucky because our Circle Bar Ranch is about a mile south. It's closer to the bay. It's marginally cooler throughout the year. Maybe it's 1 degree cooler.
Okay.
But 1 degree cooler over 180 degree growing season, that's 180 growing degree days cooler. Mm-hmm. And so, excuse me, drinking the bubbles, that's 180 growing degree days. That's about a week of ripening. So bud breaks a week later, harvest is a week later, flowering's a week later, everything's about a week later, veration's about a week later at Circle Bar Ranch. Thank God for that, because if it was all one contiguous ranch and it all ripened at the same time, it would be massive logistical challenge. Yeah. It's already a massive logistical challenge, seeing that we bring in our own crews to pick all the grapes by hand. It's really difficult to get it all done because it all essentially ripens at the same time.
Yeah.
I always have my friends that work for, still wineries or, places that grow multiple varieties, everything from Sauvignon Blanc to like Cabernet to maybe some late harvest. Yeah. They're always like, oh, you're so lucky. Your harvest is like 3 weeks long and you're done. I'm like, but you don't understand. It's 3 weeks of, I don't sleep for 3 weeks. We don't sleep. Yeah. We work, from midnight and I'm there until like 5 p.m. some days. And I go home, crash, I'm up, and we go again. And that's 6 to 7 days a week like that for 3 weeks straight. It's not this, oh, we're picking stuff, stuff's coming in slowly. The winery is, crushing grapes. It's all direct to press. So it's coming straight from the vineyard, hits the scale and goes straight into the press. And they're just going constantly, Yeah. It goes into the press, goes into the settling tanks, then into the fermenters. And there's constant, for the size of production we have way more fermenters than you would expect because everything goes. We can't turn our fermenters over 2-3 times.
Right.
Everything comes at once. So it's crazy. Our harvest is really something, and we're getting to be a very well-oiled machine, thank goodness, because it can be a madness because it's like I said, 2023 was a dream because it was so cool during harvest. We were able to just. It was like a 5 to 6 week harvest versus a 3 to 4 week harvest. Okay. So it was a little more spread out. The picking crews probably didn't love it because they weren't, picking like crazy. But, we were able to get everything in a more paced manner. We were able to really pace ourselves throughout the harvest versus just go, go, go. This year was a go, go, go year because we saw a heat wave coming and we wanted to get all that wine off, all those grapes off the vine before that heat wave hit. And the wines are phenomenal. We didn't have, we had that 4th of July heat wave, which we really managed well. We were able to weather that really well. And then after that, it was just beautiful weather. And then we had a little heat wave after that. That was by the time we were done picking, we were like, we're in the clear. We're not worried about it, So it was really, I'm really excited about this 2024 vintage. It's something that's great, but yeah, the harvest is so compressed. It's crazy.
Do the different clones or rootstock choices or anything help you spread that out a little bit? Or
because we have all this research on our sparkling wines, we have harvest dates. They were planted randomly throughout one vineyard with replicates. So it was a true study that was done on all these sparkling wine clones. So we can look at what the average harvest date was. And some of them are a week apart for Pinot Noir, 743 versus Pinot Noir 521. They might be a week apart. So if we plant them right next to each other, we can really, and that's what we're doing. We're being strategic about what we plant where, because you don't want it all ripening at the same time.
Right.
Those later ripening ones, I'm going to put in later ripening sites because I'm trying to spread out that harvest. So we really can, pick. Because a lot of times harvest comes down, you have this idea in your head, you want to pick everything when it's perfectly ripe, but a lot of times logistics trumps things where if you can't get a crew there, you can't get it picked. So being able to spread it out a little bit and be strategic about what you plant and slow down your harvest can really help with quality. So it's something we're doing actively right now.
Okay.
Should we move on to some red wine?
Sure.
So I brought another one. This is an awesome wine. It's kind of really just coming into its own right now. So, Gloria Ferrer, obviously known for sparkling wine. We kind of revamped our still wine program. It's 5% of our production, maybe.
Okay.
So it's not it's more of a passion project than anything. It's our wine club members really love it. It's not available out in the supermarkets or the wine stores. It's just something that's direct out of the tasting room. But in 2021, when I came in, I worked with the winemaker and we really evaluated all the vineyards that we had that we thought, might be the right clone, the right site to produce still wines. Specifically, Pinot Noir is the challenging one because Pinot Noir in California really needs special sites, right? You can't just slap Pinot Noir anywhere and just expect it to produce good wine. It's notorious for being a difficult grape, and it is. And, I farm 60% of the vineyards I farm are Pinot Noir. So I know Pinot Noir is a delicate grape, and it can be very challenging. So picking the right sites. So we were able to identify, probably 6 to 7 vineyard blocks that really shined. We made maybe 2 barrels of like 15 different blocks to just try and evaluate which ones were the standouts. And you can say, no, this one's definitely better for sparkling. The color's not there. The tannin's not there. That's great. That's a good thing for sparkling, right? And then this one maybe has more ripe tannin. It's got that luxurious fruit. It's really soft, that silky, velvety, melted chocolate type of structure in the wine. And those are the ones that we really were like, okay, in 22, we're going to dive into these. We did make those still wines in 21, and we picked the best lots and made a very small amount. But in 22, we were able to escalate that a little bit and bring it up to a higher level and focus on those vineyards and farm them specifically for still wine. Like I said, our goals are different for sparkling and still, right? So we have to look at that differently. And we have to know from pruning, essentially, from January pruning, when we're starting to farm it, we set it up for still wine production. Okay. And so that's kind of the difference here. This is our Vista Reserve Pinot, which is estate grown. It's all off of our estate. And essentially it's off of mostly our Circle Bar Ranch, which is our cooler ranch. There's one little piece that's blended in off our home ranch up in the hills on some rockier soils, which we actually identified maybe isn't the best for sparkling, So it's better for still wine. So we took a little bit of that, put that in here, but I'd say it's about 80% from our Circle Bar Ranch, which is a cooler. Like I said, it's marginally cooler, much rockier soils. It's got some hillside sites, but I just love how this wine is coming into its own now. I mean, it's in 2022, right after it was done fermenting, we put it into barrel and it was really tight. I was a little worried about it, but just that extra year and a half, 2 years of time in barrel and now at about a year in bottle, it's really coming together. And I'm really excited about where this wine is going. 2022 was a challenging year.
Yeah.
For
how was the heat
production
waves and everything?
We were lucky because we saw the heat wave coming. We kind of hedged our bets. We picked some before, some during, and some after the heat wave. So we had a lot of blending options, and we were able to utilize that. The stuff that it was challenging because the stuff that picked right before the heat wave was a little green. The tannins were a little tight. They were a little aggressive. They weren't that, necessarily that luxurious melted chocolate. They were more like kind of sharp, aggressive tannins. Not something that you want in Pinot Noir necessarily. But the acid was there. The acid was there. The freshness was there. That bright fruit was there. And then the stuff during the heat wave was, we had 6 or 7 days above 105 degrees with maybe 3 of those being above 110 degrees. Okay. We were picking grapes at 2 a.m. and it was 85 degrees at 2 a.m. Wow. That's not something in Carneros that you expect to happen. Yeah. Normally, in a normal vintage, when we're picking in September, it is cold. I'm bundled up during harvest, the fog is in there, it's damp, it's cold, it can be really windy. Check out my Instagram. You can see all the videos that I post to harvest. It's free. I've got all my little highlights or whatever on Instagram. We can go back and look at our harvest, but it is at 2 a.m. it's typically cold and wet and windy in Carneros. And in 2022, it was like picking in Bakersfield. It was crazy. So it was challenging to get the grapes in for the crew. And, you can't pick 60 tons a day when it's 85 degrees out at 2 a.m. And then by the time the sun comes up, it's 90. At 8 a.m. when the sun comes up, it's 90 degrees. Yeah, it's crazy. And so it was very challenging. And luckily, we were able to get some right where we wanted it. And then there was some that we picked a little later that was overripe. That kind of gave us that luxurious kind of curranty, like dried fruit. A little more body, soft, very soft tannin, a little alcohol boost. So we were able to blend all these components to get the wine that we wanted. And I'm really happy with how it turned out. I think there's some nice spice character, which Pinot Noir in Carneros has this tendency to like this cherry cola, which, the cola-y kind of does have this spice character, but this is kind of leans more into it. It's got that fruit, but it's also got that spice.
How closely are you working with the winemaking team there? On, I guess obviously on picking decisions, but sort of
year round. I mean, it's
also,
year round. It's Kyle and I. Kyle's the winemaker at Gloria Ferrer. Kyle and I sit 6 feet apart. Our desks are in the same office, which is our technical tasting room. So we have a tasting table. We have everything. He's working on blends. He's like, come here, taste this. Let's jump in on this. We do our grading tasting. I'm involved really deeply in that. going through tasting each lot. We're able to keep each vineyard separate in the cellar and taste them. Sparkling winemaking is all about blending. It's all about putting together a cuvee. We don't do any single vineyard sparkling wines. The reason is because you're looking at everything as a component in a blend, right? There's very few wines that you're like, this is a complete sparkling wine on its own. It just doesn't exist, especially single block, a single block or a single tank. This is not a complete wine. You have to bring in other parts. Some bring in the aromatics, some bring in the acidity, some bring in the body, the finish, the mid palate. You have to look at it as a complete wine and look at all the different components. So we're able to identify and grade these components to the blends, and he brings me in and involves me in all of this. And it's kind of my report card at the end of the year, right? We get A, B, or C, what each block is. And we do it all double blind, so nobody knows. You don't have any preconceived notions. Okay. So sometimes those ugly duckling vineyards produce the best wines of the year.
Yeah.
And you don't want to have a preconceived notion that, hey, this is going to be a bad wine. It's going to go into this blend or we're going to bulk it out and sell it as bulk wine because it's, it can't be any good. And then all of a sudden you taste it double blind, you give it an A, and you're like, this is going to end up in our Tête de Cuvée. This is going to end up in our Carneros Cuvée, which is our highest end blend. And that happens more often than you would think. And sometimes those pretty museum vineyards don't perform as well. And so it's important to do these double blind. But Kyle's out in the vineyards every week with me throughout the growing season. We're making decisions. We look at, hey, how did this block do last year? What did we do to affect that, especially low performers? When we give something a B- or a C, it doesn't happen very often anymore. But when it does happen, we have to look at what happened there. Is it time to pull this vineyard? Do we need to replant it? Did we mess up the irrigation somehow? Did we pull too many leaves? Did we get some sunburn? What happened here? And so we can address that going forward in the next vintage to be able to correct those problems. So he works very intimately with me in the vineyards to be able to improve the wines here. Our goal is continuous improvement, is every year to improve the quality of the wines, the sustainability of the vineyards, the health of the vines, the health of the soil, everything we're trying to improve marginally every single year. But yeah, him and I work very closely together. We're constantly riffing off of each other because we sit so close to each other. Hey, I got this idea. What do you think about if we did this? What do you think about, hey, what about putting these two pieces together in the blend? Hey, what if we prune this way in this vineyard? Hey, we're replanting this block. What if we tried this rootstock there instead of the one we were thinking about? All that kind of stuff, just bouncing ideas. We don't have separate winemaking and vineyard departments. It's kind of one team that's contiguous that goes, it's not like I farm the grapes. Yeah. I drop them off at the crush pad and say, your problem now, and then, same thing with him, where he's like, there's no grapes on the vines. I'm not doing anything in the vineyards. I'm not going to go out there during pruning and talk about pruning with you. So I think that's part of the reason why I love working there, is because of the relationship between myself and the winemaking team and being able to have that collaboration and that follow through to be able to say, hey, once the wines hit the crush pad, I want to be able to follow them all the way to here, where we're drinking this Pinot or this Zero Dosage Sencia Blanc de Blanc. I want to be able to follow these wines all the way through the process and understand how what we're doing in the vineyard affects those. Because any good winemaker will tell you, I'm repeating something that's been said a million times out in the world, but you can't make great wine off of a shitty vineyard. You have to. You have to have the right fruit to begin with. And, you could definitely make bad wine with good fruit, but you cannot make great wine off of bad fruit. So knowing how to follow through and then reach back to the vineyards and follow it back to the vineyards as well. So, when a wine turns out in a way that we don't want it to, what happened? Let's correct that so it doesn't happen again. So yeah, there's definitely tons of collaboration that happens between the winemaking team and the viticulture and vineyard teams. So,
have you experimented at all with any kind of regenerative farming type practices in the vineyards?
Regenerative is a word that use, but I try and stay away from because there's no strict definition for it.
Okay.
I know there's the regenerative organic certification, and I really like what they're doing. There's some things I agree with, some things I don't. I think it makes sense for some situations, but not other situations. I believe we would qualify once we're certified organic for that certification. I think that regenerative organic, because it's a very hot term right now, not a lot of people understand what it means. The idea is great, is returning carbon to the soil, integrating and diversifying your business, bringing livestock back to a farming operation. It's obviously, in theory, it's great. We bring sheep into the vineyards, we graze. We have an organic farm where we're growing produce for our kitchen and our culinary program. We do olive oil. We have all these things we do, that would qualify us for that system. The big thing that they're very anti-tillage.
Okay.
You can still qualify for, I believe, the bronze tier or I can't remember, silver tier with that. But I think tillage, I think water is our number one resource here in California that's going to impact us in the future. And tillage is an easy thing to point the finger at because obviously I agree, it'll lower your soil carbon. It can, erosion can happen. It can open you up to erosion and losing topsoil. But I think tillage has its place and it's important. And we have to remember why we till the soils. And it's to hold water in the soils, to remove the competition from weeds so we don't have to irrigate as much. All these old vineyards, most of them are dry farmed, the art of dry farming has been lost in California. And you have to, in your mind, think, what is more important? I have slightly higher carbon emissions, or I'm drawing water out of a finite aquifer, and I'm having to irrigate a vineyard every week because I have a cover crop that's actively growing and competing with the vines, and I don't have a dust mulch over my soils that are trapping that water from the winter rains. We don't get rain for 6 months, at least 6 months a year in California. So whatever rain you get in the winter, you have to really trap it in the soil and make sure it's there for the vines. And I think villainizing tillage, what you're doing is that you're forcing people to irrigate more, which is a finite resource that we do not have a lot of in California, which is water. And not only that, but by having to irrigate more, you're also having to run pumps. You're having to use electricity. A lot of times it's diesel pumps that are running these pumps. And so you're putting emissions out there as well by doing that. So you have to really do the math and see, is my, carbon loss from tillage more than the carbon that I'm putting out there from irrigating? Also, do I have the irrigation resources to be able to afford to not till? I think that's a conversation that's not being had enough in this regenerative and this organic and sustainable wine growing space, is that, by vilifying tillage, are we going to be depleting our water resources? And, is it something that we should be looking at is, hey, we need to be looking at dry farm. What were they doing? We're sitting here in the Livermore Valley. We get about 12 to 18 inches of rain a year. Where up in Napa, they might get 40 inches of rain a year. And so out here, we have to look at tillage because it's one of those things that's like really going to lock the water into the soils that we have. So we don't have to rely on that. Up in Napa, there's people that are irrigating every week still, and they get 40 inches of rain a year because they refuse to till the soils. They want to run these no-till systems, but they're pulling from the aquifers and really draining the aquifers. Same thing's happening in the Central Valley and Lodi, all over the state. People are really relying on irrigation more than they ever have, when we have to look back at, what they were doing 70, 80 years ago, before, even when these old vine, these, pre-prohibition vineyards were put in, they never irrigated. Obviously there was some flood irrigation that was being done, but a majority of vineyards were dry farmed. Even here in the Livermore Valley, where we get 12 to 18 inches of rain a year, a lot of these vineyards out here were dry farmed. And part of that is vigorous rootstocks, vigorous clones, choosing the varieties that are going to grow well here. You plant Pinot Noir in a drought area, you're not going to be able to produce good wines. You're going to have to irrigate a lot. So being able to choose the right rootstocks, choose the right varieties for your site, I think is really important for that, more so than, not tilling or adjusting your irrigation. If you plant the right variety and right rootstock in the right site, this vine spacing, row spacing is also important. Having enough space to where the vines don't compete with each other. There's this other trend of going super tight vineyard spacings, and then you look out there and you go, why are you putting that there? And they're like, oh, so the vines can compete with each other. But you have 2 irrigation lines running under every vine. You're irrigating. Clearly the vines are able to, have scarcity because you're having to put water and fertilizer on those vines. If you just spread them out, you could cut your water use down dramatically. So there's this adage that I think is slowly fading, where it's this devigorating rootstocks, planting these low vigor clones, tight row and vine spacing where the vines compete with each other, and then having to supplement with dramatic irrigations. I'm hoping that's kind of, that trend is fading away, and we're going to go back to, you look at dry areas where they've traditionally grown grapes in Spain, in southern France, in, maybe Greece, all of these areas where it's hot and dry. They don't have meter by meter spacing vineyards. They have these big, wide, expansive rows with lots of room between vines, a lot of times head trained vines. There's a reason why our ancestors, in California, our predecessors were doing that and planting vineyards that way, because they were dry farming them, and they know what, they came from the old country, a lot of them, in Italy, they do the same thing. They don't have meter by meter spacing in Tuscany, in Sicily. They understand that you have to have your vines to have enough space for them. You have to put them on vigorous rootstocks that are going to tap into that, because they can't irrigate in a lot of cases. Here we have the luxury of irrigation. So we think that just because we have it, we have to use it. But in my opinion, I think adjusting your planting and planting what you need to for your region and for your soils and for your climate is more important than anything else. I think, going back to your questions, I kind of went on a tangent there, but the regenerative movement, if you will, I think they're doing a lot of great things. I really do. I just think that we need to look at what we're villainizing. And, I think being a grower that follows the organic principles, I think that a lot of those fall in line with that. But I think the one thing is the tillage is we need to look at tillage on a case-by-case basis, because if you're in West Sonoma Coast and you're getting tons of rain and fog, and you really do need your vines to compete, growing a green cover crop and not tilling, and, it's important. That is something that's viable there. But when you're in the Livermore Valley, or maybe Lodi, or maybe even the Napa Valley, you might need to cultivate to be able to save those water resources for when you truly need them, or preserve them, and so that they can interact with the environment, rather than, dumping them on your vineyard so they can be taken up by your vines and lose it to the atmosphere. The water resources in California have got to be the most important resource that we have. It's what, we all remember the droughts that we've had the last 15 years. We've had 2 major droughts. Do we really want to be villainizing something that can help lower our water usage in vineyards and other crops, not just vineyards, but other crops? So that's my 2 cents on regenerative. I do agree with most of what they do. The one thing is the tillage.
Well, you had mentioned sitting here in Livermore Valley, but we're sitting here at the site of your current and future vineyard.
Yes.
Here.
So we're at the Vine Farm Ridge property here. We're in kind of the southeastern Livermore Valley, up in the hills, overlooking, all of the vineyards. Got the windmills in the distance, and this is kind of the site that my wife and my family have chosen as kind of our project. And we've got a 16-acre vineyard here, 16-acre property. It's currently planted to mostly Chardonnay. We have about an acre of Zinfandel and about half an acre of Petite Sirah planted here. But this vineyard, unfortunately, we purchased it. Part of the reason why we purchased it is because it's been neglected for a long time and needs to be redeveloped. But the other part is because it's an awesome vineyard site. Mm-hmm. This is amazing soils here. These are, those Positas loam soils, which are just the best in the Livermore Valley, in my opinion, especially for what we want to do. We're up in the hills, so we're off the hot valley floor. We get those breezes up here. which are just amazing. It helps cool it down in the afternoon. There's a reason the windmills are up in the hills. It gets quite breezy up here, something I'm used to in Carneros. Right. But it's just an awesome site, and I think it has awesome potential for, making world-class wines. It's got these gravelly, rocky soils that are really deep. They've got a higher clay content. I talked about minimizing irrigation. They hold a lot of water. They're well drained. They'll soak in that water. That top 18 inches is more loamy. And then there's clays below, so they can really hold that water in. And I think the way I think about viticulture is all about water, right? It's all about water. It's all about water management throughout the year. You need lots of water early. You want to stress in the middle, but then you don't want stress late in the season too. So you got to be able to manage your vineyards effectively to do that. So we'll be replanting this whole property. The vineyard's actually starting to be removed on Monday, which we're very excited about. Then we'll fallow it for a year. We'll start to put the plans together. We've got rootstock on order. We'll be planting rootstock and then field budding it. Okay. I'm really excited. I showed you my whole planting plan. It's quite extensive.
Looks pretty amazing.
It's really exciting. It's, focusing mostly on California heritage varietals between things like Zinfandel, Petit Syrah, Carignan, Mataro, but also, Rhone and Mediterranean reds and whites, where we have, the Mourvedre, we have the Grenache, we have the Syrah, we have the Viognier, we've got the Counoise, we've got the Cinsault, Grenache Blanc, Picpoul Blanc, Vermentino, things like that. And then kind of my perspective on it is it's all going to be head-trained vines, wider spacing. We're in an arid region here. Beautiful, cooler climate here. A lot of people think of the Livermore as hot, 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 but it just gets so cold at night here. You got here, 10 o'clock this morning, and it was pretty chilly.
Yeah, it was a cold morning.
But it's a very arid climate. So it's something where water is of utmost concern. So having those wider spacings, being able to manage our irrigations, we'll be farming it and transitioning it to our fully organic. And so just planting varietals that'll do well in those situations where it is, it's a warmer Mediterranean climate here. Let's plant Mediterranean varietals. Let's plant varietals that we know historically do well in warm regions. Petit Syrah, Zinfandel, Carignan, Mataro. These are all varieties we know do well here, plus all the Mediterranean varieties that we know can handle the heat, can handle the drought. They're vigorous growers. They want to be in those dry conditions. They don't like cold, wet conditions. So let's plant what wants to be planted here. So that's kind of our vision and our goal for this property. And then we want to make wine off of it as well, and maybe I'll pour you some of this now. That's a good transition. But I brought our first vintage. We were lucky enough to make a small production off of our vineyard here before we removed it. So in 2023, we made our first vintage. We made just Petit Syrah in 2023. And then in 2024, we picked both the Zinfandel and the Petit Syrah. Still figuring out if I want to make a blend out of those, if I want to do varietal Petit Syrah, varietal Zinfandel. But the beauty of this is this wine right here you're tasting is actually, when the property was purchased, we were told it was Petit Syrah. It is Petit Syrah mostly, but it's field blended, right? So there's small percentages of Syrah and Zinfandel field blended in with the Petit Syrah. So it doesn't have that same aggressiveness that Petit Syrah typically has. I like to, it's got a little bit of that savory, meaty character from the Syrah. It's got that pop of fruit from the Zinfandel. It's a little bit lower in alcohol than you would expect. The acidity is screaming on this one.
Really nice.
I like to drink this wine chilled sometimes, which for a Petit Syrah, you wouldn't expect. But it's just got a super long finish. It's a wine that pizza and barbecue comes to mind, It's a wine that I feel like pairs well with where we are in Livermore, where pizza, and it's a very, blue collar town. It's pizza and barbecue town. This is a wine that pairs well with those kinds of things. And so I love this wine. This is, it's a 2023. It's young for Petit Syrah. It's got a lot of time to really age and to really develop. But
tannins are really refined though for
absolutely.
Petit.
Yeah, Petit can be so aggressive, and my goal was tannin management from the beginning, because I know Petit Syrah. You know, we grew a lot of Petit Syrah Wente. I remember doing a lot of, you know, post-harvest tastings where we'd taste 30 Petit Syrah lots and your mouth would just be destroyed. Feels like you put your tongue through a cheese grater after that. That kind of Petit Syrah definitely has a place, but that's a blending component, right? This is a standalone wine. So we need to have tannin management. And, you know, it doesn't have that super dark color that comes with those heavy tannins. It's got kind of a you know, a bright, you know, ruby type color, which, you know, that's my goal from the beginning is not to have this big aggressive wine, is to have something that's a little more fresh, that can show the lighter side of Petit Syrah. And that's kind of the goal with all our wines. And what we're trying to do here is show that these varieties don't have to be these over-extracted big wines. They can be elegant. They can produce world-class elegant wines. And, you know, this is all super small production, but it's something that we're really proud of. We wanted to do it because we wanted to get a snapshot of these vineyards before we pulled them out.
Sure.
And, you know, our first year having this property here is we wanted to produce some wines from it. So we had the 23, you know, very small production, 24, very small production. We're going to pull the vineyard in next week, basically, and then replant in 26, where then it'll be another 3 to 4 years before we get another harvest. Then it'll be another year before we can release wines. So everything's a patience game, you know. It's all about patience. It all takes time. Nothing happens overnight, but it was really nice to be able to see that this site has the potential that we thought it did, and you know, do this kind of little experiment. We'll release some of this wine, you know, in very limited quantities, knowing that it'll be we don't have enough to be able to, you know, put it out in the world, but, you know, be able to release it to our friends and family and anyone that's interested, anyone that wants to, you know, see what we're doing. But this is something that we really, you know, once we made this wine, we're like, yeah, we have something special here. You know, we know that on this site, at least Petit Syrah, you know, Petit Syrah in a blend can really perform well and can do what we want. This is what we're going for, right? You know, ultimately, we'd like to make some varietal wines. We'd like to make some blends. I'd like to do a heritage red, a Rhone style red, and a Rhone, you know, a Côte de Rhone style wine, and a Côte de Rhone white, you know, Côte de Rhone blanc style wine. That's you know, the white with the white varietals, and then maybe every year do a little bit different a few single varietal wines off of that. So it's something that, like, we're excited that we know we have potential here, and we know we have something special. So we're excited about it. We're really excited to develop this property. You know, we talked about the, you know, 12 varieties that are going in here, but we're also going to be doing field blending, and I think that's an important part of California's heritage viticulturally. You and I have talked offline about, you know, how, you know, passion for the history of California wine, and single monovarietal vineyards were kind of rare prior to Prohibition. Most stuff was field blended. Most stuff had a mix of, you know, if you had a Zinfandel vineyard, chances are it was not 100% Zinfandel. It maybe had some Mataro, and maybe had some Petit Syrah, Carignan, Mission, something else, even some white varietals mixed in there. And so it's important not to be afraid of that field blending. There's a reason why that does well. That's, you know, very traditional. And even like the Southern Rhone, that's very traditional. Those old vineyards in the Southern Rhone, pre-phylloxera, almost all of them were field blended. You know, they do that for a reason, because certain varietals have certain attributes that in different climatic conditions of a vintage do better. So it really helps level out the quality of your vineyard. So instead of being a 100% Pinot Noir vineyard that in a warm year you get really screwed, but in a cold year you have phenomenal wines, you know, you have a field blend out here where we're, you know, maybe something like Zinfandel does really well in a cooler vintage, but if you field blend in some Carignan, the Carignan can withstand and does really well in a warmer vintage. So it helps level out the quality when maybe the quality of the Zinfandel drops a little bit. Hey, you have a couple percent Carignan in there, but it's a phenomenal year for Carignan, or Mataro. And so your quality of your wine stays very even, regardless of the climatic conditions that vintage brings. So that, there's a benefit. There's a reason why these field blended old vine vineyards have done so well in California for so long. And we're, kind of rediscovering them and have been for the last couple decades. But a lot of these old vine vineyards, things that places like Ridge and Bedrock are making these wines to highlight them, because a lot of them are blends and field blends, and year after year they produce phenomenal wines because they have resiliency, against these climatic conditions. And I think that's something important that we want to highlight here is, I may be planting a block of Grenache, but there's probably five different varieties in that vineyard, in that single block. So it may be 90, 80% Grenache, but there'll be some other stuff in there as well. So, just because I'm pouring you a Petit Syrah doesn't mean it's 100% Petit Syrah. A lot of these Rhone varieties, Côte de Rhone wines are blended wines. There's very little single varietal dominant wines in a Côte de Rhone. You have it may be Grenache dominant, but there'll always be some Syrah, some Mourvedre, some Cinsault, some Counoise. There's always going to be some other stuff in there to help bring that and make that a complete wine and help even out the vintage variation. And I'm all about, highlighting a vintage, but you also want to make sure you're delivering a quality wine to your consumer year after year.
Yeah, it seems like you're trying to mimic that older California field blend in a couple ways. Some with kind of interplanting other varieties in the larger blocks, and then also the fuzzy blocks as you
so
call
like
them.
We have exactly. We'll have, instead of having hard lines between our vineyards, the way I've designed the planting of this ranch is that you plant stuff next to each other that plays well together. We have the Zinfandel planted next to the Petit Syrah, the Carignan, the Mourvedre, and instead of there being a hard line where this row is Zinfandel and this row is Petit Syrah, they slowly fade into each other. So, that first row of Zinfandel might be 60% Zinfandel and 40% Petit Syrah. The next row might be 75-25. The next row might be 90-10, and it slowly fades into that. And the goal is to pick it all at the same time. Take that row of Zinfandel, that first row of, air quote, I'm using air quotes, Zinfandel, but it may be that first row is 60% Zinfandel. And then in the next row over might be Mataro, where it's the same thing, fades in, and then you have some other stuff field blended in as well. Obviously you want a majority Zinfandel. It needs to be 75% Zinfandel to be able to label it varietally Zinfandel. But it's dominated by Zinfandel, but it has characteristics of those other varietals to where maybe it's 10 to 20% something else, and that can help really add one, complexity, and two, resilience in a difficult vintage. So yes, it's really taking inspiration from a lot of the old vine vineyards in California, as well as the Rhone Valley and what they're doing out in the Rhone Valley. We're putting in head trained vines. So I believe these, head train, we call them head train in California, and in France they call them gobelets. In Spain they call them vasos, it's goblet style vines. And so I believe there's a lot of climate resiliency built into those vine training systems to where you're shading the fruit much better. You have an open center of the vine. You're really able to get the airflow in there. A lot of these varieties we're planting are very tight, big clusters. So preventing rot, getting the airflow in there, getting some dappled light. The varieties we're planting are resistant to wind. Most of them are planted in the Rhone Valley, which is very well known for its winds. And so, they're, upright growing varieties that can really withstand our climate here and really will thrive in our climate here. So the goal was to look at the site and look what the site wants. And I believe that these are the varietals. We're planting on very vigorous rootstock. We have some nematode problems here. So it's a very vigorous nematode resistant rootstock. But the idea is to be able to hopefully, as much as possible, dry farm it. When we're developing the vineyards, obviously we'll have to put some water on. But then I'm going to try and transfer it over to micro sprinkler irrigation, and maybe we irrigate early in the season and maybe post harvest. But I don't plan on putting any irrigation on during the season. And I'd like to. We are on fairly steep hills here.
Yeah.
You know, we can have 10% slopes in parts of the vineyard. Erosion's a concern. So especially if we're cultivating the soils, we're disking, we're tilling the soils, erosion's a concern. Putting in a cover crop and being able to turn on the micro sprinklers to start that cover crop before the rains come to really hold that soil in place. Something I'm thinking a lot about. So instead of putting that irrigation line, 2 feet off the ground, bringing it up to 4 to 6 feet off the ground and being able to run micro sprinklers off of that. Something I'm playing around with. We're looking at what are our options, what makes sense for this site, right? And don't just do what everyone else is doing. Don't plant what everyone else is planting. Do what's right for our site here on Vine Farm Ridge, up in the hills, the southern hills of the Livermore Valley, what we feel will thrive here. And my goal is to have a 100-year-old vineyard, to plant a vineyard that will be here for my grandchildren or great-grandchildren that'll be able to take over, not plant a vineyard that's in 25 years going to be ripped out and replaced because, hey, that varietal isn't in vogue or hey, it's not getting the vigor we want anymore because the vines are too densely planted. We need to rip it out to be able to plant something else. I talk with my nurseryman who's helping me put together this project, and he's like, "Are you sure you want that clone? That's, really vigorous, really productive clone." And I go, I'd rather have the fruit on the vine and be able to drop it on the ground to increase my concentration than in 50 years not have that fruit there. Yields will naturally decline. And the number one reason vineyards get removed out is because the production has fallen. And so in 50 years, if I hit the production level that we want, that's the goal, right? I want my son to be able to farm this vineyard in 50 years and be, wow, we're still getting 4 tons per acre. I can't believe that, without dropping fruit. Now, the first long time, we're probably going to have to thin fruit. We're really going to have to thin fruit. We're going to have to be diligent about that. But I always say I would rather take fruit off the vine than wish I could put it on the vine. And that's something that I'm thinking about when I'm developing this vineyard is I'm not looking at the short term. I'm looking at the long term. I'm looking at, hey, the first 20 years, this vineyard's just going to be getting started. I'm looking at, I want my children, my grandchildren, my nieces, nephews, all of them to hopefully someone's interested in it, first of all. If not, then, hopefully I'll find someone that is, that will want to, take this on. But my goal is this is Livermore is a historic wine growing region. Where are the historic vineyards? Most of them have been ripped out. And so there's not a lot of old vines in Livermore. There's very few, in fact. And so, looking at, where are the 50, 60, 70, 80, 100-year-old vineyards? We've been growing vines in Livermore since like 1850s, I think. But, all these historic vineyards are gone because they've been pulled out for what's in vogue, what's higher yielding, all of that stuff, and not looking at, the history of what's here. And I think that's really important. And I think that's something that I'd like to be that vineyard. I don't see a lot of 100-year-old vineyards, people planning for a 100-year-old vineyard going in Livermore or anywhere really. I mean, I'm sure there's a few around the state, but in California, we're typically not looking at longevity as our goal when we're planting a vineyard. And I want to start, doing that and hopefully leading the charge. Hopefully other people take interest and want to do the same thing. But, being a viticulturist that replants a lot of vineyards, I see the problems that, plagues 30, 40-year-old vineyards. When you hit that kind of turning point, what are the problems that make you pull that vineyard out? And I'm trying to develop a vineyard here that will avoid those problems, putting it on those vigorous rootstocks, increasing the vine spacing and row spacing, using heavier producing and more vigorous clones of each variety, field blending, all those sorts of things to hopefully, when I'm long gone, this vineyard will still be producing and still be kicking and making kick-ass wines. So that's my goal.
Yeah, I feel like Livermore still has some untapped potential, or maybe it's potential that hasn't been tapped as recently.
Yeah, I mean there's definitely phenomenal wines. Yeah, there's definitely phenomenal wines. I think a lot of times people think of Livermore and they think of, go on a wine tasting trip, hop on the wine trolley, get get your fill of wine, have some fun,
Yeah.
head home, but it's not serious wines. You go to Napa or Sonoma, maybe Paso for some serious wines. But there are serious wines being made in Livermore Valley.
For
There's
sure. Yeah.
phenomenal world-class wines being made here. And I think that you have to look a little harder for them. And I think that, a lot of people have that vision and reputation just because some of the, maybe some of the more well-known wines are not those high qualities. But there's a lot of people. I mean, you've had people on your podcast before that are really pushing hard for quality wines in Livermore.
Yeah.
And, I'm on board with that. I'm on that boat, and, maybe I want to do something a little different, but at the end of the day, it's all about driving the message that Livermore Valley is a phenomenal place to grow grapes and make phenomenal wines.
Mm-hmm. I think you touched on it a little bit, but how do you envision kind of divvying up these blocks in the winery and with the winemaking process?
Yeah. So, I planted and I developed this plan with essentially 3 big blends in mind, right? We have your Heritage Red, you've got your Rhone style Côte de Rhone Red, and you've got your Rhone style White, your Côte de Rhone Blanc, or, Mediterranean White, Vermentino, not traditionally a Rhone varietal, but plays well with those other Rhone varietals. I think those are kind of how I started. And I think blending, I planted them in proportions that I think would play well in a blend.
Okay.
Not any one varietal being dominant, but larger percentages of varietals that I enjoy. I have Mourvedre, Mataro, Mourvedre, Mataro being synonyms for the same grape, can play in both blends, right? So I've got things like Carignan also can play in both blends. Carignan being a historically California varietal, but also, Rhone style varietal as well. And so looking at these as blends that maybe change slightly year to year, but hopefully will be very similar in style, something that's maybe a little bigger, more robust as a Heritage California style blend, and then maybe a little more elegant and light and fresh. So like more of a chillable kind of red, lower phenolics, lower tannin style red. We have a lot of Counoise. We have a lot of Cinsault, which are bright, fresh fruit style grapes that produce that style of wine. We have Grenache, which is obviously very fruit forward, can drive alcohol. We've got Mourvedre and Carignan and Syrah that bring body and texture and intensity to the wines. But the ideal being that maybe the California Heritage style will be the bigger, more robust red wine. We have a lighter red wine. And then we have a really acid-driven, fresh, minerality-driven white wine with some aromatics as well. We've got Picpoul Blanc, we've got Vermentino, we've got Grenache Blanc, we've got Viognier. And then also every year being able to do some amount of single varietal wines to highlight these individual components because, and then Rhone varietals tend to lead very well to rosés as well. I'd love to do a little bit of rosé as well. Okay. But the idea was we plant this property to be able to support an entire wine program for a winery. Hopefully we can eventually open up a tasting room. We're planning on building something where we can host guests here at the property. But, eventually we're hoping that we grow large enough that we can open up a tasting room, maybe in downtown Livermore, or even like a wine bar style hospitality area in downtown Livermore or in the surrounding areas. But the goal is to be able to be self-sufficient here. I'm all about estate grown. I think estate grown is the way to go for wineries. I've come from my last 2 employers being estate grown wineries, so I see the benefits of not going out and purchasing fruit. When you purchase fruit, you have no control. Most of those growers are only incentivized by yields. They get paid more when they produce more grapes. It's not when they produce higher quality grapes necessarily. So being estate grown where my goals are to produce the best wines, I can control that 100% here. I don't have to rely on other people who don't necessarily have the same farming principles that I do not understand viticulture in the way I do. For sure, there's great growers out there. Don't get me wrong. And there's plenty of wineries that have built decades-long relationships with growers where they understand their goals, they have great communication, but typically it's more difficult. If you have control of your own vineyards, you can produce what you want, and you have full control of everything from start to finish. And I think being organically grown, I'd like to certify this property as organic and make wines that are produced from organic grapes. There's one other vineyard in Livermore that's certified organic.
Oh, that's it.
And that's it, I believe.
Okay.
So, there's not a lot of options out there for me to.
Sure.
And I'm pretty, my family's going to be living here, my in-laws, my kids going to be running around, my nieces, my nephews are going to be running around here. I don't want to be spraying nasty stuff. I want to maintain this as an organic operation. My dog comes out with me every day. I don't want her getting into stuff and so it's estate grown and organic are important principles for me as well. And I think that's, not just I think it's for a wine quality standpoint. When you produce these high vigor, high yielding clones and you do it in a conventional, I think a lot of times they're high yielding and high vigor in conventional systems, but when you shift them over to organic, they really balance out nicely. I think that's a misconception that people have about these clones is, well, yeah, when you dump on irrigation and you dump on nitrogen fertilizers, yeah, you're giving them jet fuel. Of course, they're going to be high vigor. But when you bring them into a system where they're more balanced, where your fertilization program is based on compost, you're dry farming or you're minimally irrigating, I think you see the difference in those clones and rootstocks that they really show what they can do and they're framed better than if they are in those conventional systems. So.
Well, yeah, you were talking about estate, and I think that was something I was going to ask you is if you envision it as kind of an estate-based project.
Yeah, I do. I do envision this as an estate-based project, and maybe that means that we take on more vineyards eventually, but I don't want to get too ahead of myself. I think that it's important to take things one step at a time. We might, once we get established and once we figure everything out here, we get our equipment set up, all of that, we'll look at maybe offering farming services for other vineyards. I'd like to be able to pass on my experience to other people. There's not a lot of viticulturists in Livermore Valley. There's not a lot of options when it comes to custom farming, vineyard management services in Livermore Valley. That's maybe something that we would expand to. But like I said, one step at a time. Let's take it one step at a time. The ultimate goal is to be able to produce world-class wines off of our estate vineyard here, to do it in a sustainable, organic manner, to be able to use these kind of old world style farming practices and heritage style farming practices and really produce wines that we're proud of. And, I'm glad I was able to share this wine with you because this is kind of what our vision is, right?
Okay.
This is the wines that'll age for a long time, that have a lower, I think the pH on this is like 3.35, which, hopefully this wine can age and, I can open a bottle of this. My son was born in 2022. This is a 2023, unfortunately, but, hopefully my son can enjoy a bottle of this one day, and that's my goal, is to produce wines that are fresh and we can drink when they're 1 year old, or they can drink for 20 years and 30 years or whatever they may age to, and not make wines that they're world class in quality, but they're not world class in price, and hopefully make wines that are approachable. I think our biggest problem with, why we're seeing declining wine sales is we're trying to make wines so exclusive. You have to be a millionaire to be able to afford to drink good wine. People think just because they can raise prices, they should, which in reality, we're pricing out younger drinkers. Baby boomers are the biggest drinkers of wine, and they're aging out of drinking, and they're not going to be drinking wine. I mean, I believe that's part of the reason why the wine industry is seeing decreased sales, is because baby boomers are starting to stop drink wine. Maybe their doctors, whatever it may be, are telling them, don't drink as much wine or don't drink as much. And we don't have that generation behind them because we've priced them out, especially priced them out of good wine. I think that there's no reason why you can't make an affordable $30, $25 bottle of wine when they're going to something like, I know a lot of my friends drink whiskey, for the same price as a good bottle of wine, you can buy a good bottle of whiskey. How many more drinks do you get out of a good bottle of whiskey?
Right.
You maybe get 5-6 drinks out of a good bottle of wine. You might get 30 drinks out of a good, economically, it makes a huge difference.
Sure.
And so, being a millennial myself, when you're struggling to pay the rent, you're not going to shell out $80 for a bottle of wine. I got lots of friends that are, there's no reason why they would ever buy an $80 bottle of wine. But I think a lot of people are happy to buy a $20, $25 bottle of wine. And of course, we'll want to make something special. We want to make, a wine that maybe is the top of the top, but I want a majority of our wines to be very approachable and very affordable. I don't want our wines to be something that you feel like you have to save for a special occasion. I drink wine almost every night. I have a glass of wine with dinner every night. And, I want that to be available. And, I'm lucky enough to where I'm tapped into the industry and I know where to find those killer wines for $20 to $30. And I have a glass every night. It lasts me a week. My whole weeknight, every weeknight I'm drinking one glass. That's a bottle of wine. That's $5 a night. That's nothing crazy, And I want that to be accessible to people because I do think you almost have to be an insider to be able to know where to get those bottles of wine. And I want people to be able to come to us and be like, hey, we know we're going to get rock star wines from you guys, killer wines. Everything we get from you is going to be good. And we know we're not going to get, raked over the coals and we're going to have to break out, empty our bank account for these wines.
Yeah.
And so that's my goal is to do that. And I think there's a level of expectation in the Livermore Valley that you do get a better deal for wines. And I do think this is a great place to come for wines that don't break the bank, that are more affordable and better price to quality ratio, because I think that's the expectation when people come here. And I think it's true. And I think that's why this region's going to continue to thrive, is because they haven't priced out their consumers completely, where places like Napa and some parts and some wineries in Sonoma continue to raise prices every single year without looking at who their consumer is. And, I'm lucky enough to work for Gloria Ferrer, who has a great vision of what they want to be and what they want to do. But when we're doing our own thing, I want to do something a little different.
Sure.
And this is where I see the future of the Livermore Valley going, is producing fantastic quality to price ratio wines. A lot of that's being done in, places like Lodi, places like the Sierra Foothills, Livermore Valley, some places in the Central Coast. You get really good bang for your buck wines, but they're hard to find. And so being able to lock in those places and lock in where you can go, you can go to a producer and be able to always get a good quality wine that you can drink during the week, or you can bring to a party, or you can open on Thanksgiving, So that's my goal. And then hopefully, we talked about wine styles, and I'm kind of popping around a bit here, but coming from Gloria Ferrer, I do want to produce a sparkling wine off this estate. I really do. And that's just a passion thing for me, because I've spent so much time really dialing into sparkling winemaking and growing grapes for sparkling wine, and being able to use varietals like Vermentino, Picpoul, Viognier, Grenache Blanc, even things like Counoise and Cinsault, Zinfandel. You can use those varieties for sparkling wine. And I think it would be really interesting. Just play around as an experiment. And we talked about what my vision is for this place, and sparkling wine is definitely in the story there. Being that is part of my background.
Yeah. Would you want to do something like a traditional method?
Absolutely. I'm very adamant about traditional method being the only method, in my opinion, of true sparkling wine and really high quality sparkling wines. I basically don't drink anything that's not traditional method anymore, just because the quality of the wine is so dramatic, and a lot of times the price is not that dramatically different. The complexity, the mousse on the wine, the aromatics, the bubbles are so much finer. They lift the aromas out of the wine. It's very light on your palate as far as the effervescence goes, but the mouthfeel and the body of the wines, the ageability of the wines are so much different. So being able to use traditional method to produce sparkling wines is the only option as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. What do you kind of envision the winemaking style like for the still wines?
Yeah.
I mean, this seems, definitely lower alcohol, higher acid.
Yeah,
style.
Absolutely. So yeah, depending on the wine we're producing, I think the theme across all of them is low intervention as far as oak goes, and winemaking tricks goes. I want to, I've worked for vineyards a long time, and a long time I've seen, winemakers really just crush the soul from wine, and that happens all over the world, really, not just in California, all over the world, where you lose the fruit, you lose the essence of the vineyard. And I don't want to lose sight of that. I want to highlight it, right? I want our vineyard to be what you taste it and you're like, this is a Vine Farm Ridge wine. This is a wine that came from this vineyard that Brad produced, because I know that because the oak is very minimal. The oak is there for texture. It's not there for aromatics. It's not there for flavor components. The oak is there to build around the wine and support the wine, not to overshadow the fruit. Pick grapes when they're fresh. Don't wait until they're 29 bricks and they're dehydrated and it's all cooked fruit and you're just trying to get the alcohol and color. You're looking for the non-flavor components. Wine's about flavor. At the end of the day, textures are great, but wine's about flavor. And so when you're trying to get the alcohols and the tannins and the colors out of the wine by letting it ripen, you lose that fresh fruit character, which is my biggest pet peeve with wines that we produce in California, is losing that fruit character and losing that connection to the vineyard because we're chasing these other things that people think are so important. But a lot of people that drink wine aren't sommeliers. They aren't, wine. They want that fruit. They want to taste that vineyard. They want that freshness. They want it. This is Petite Sirah. You can drink it chilled. Yeah. And my wife and I do drink it chilled. Yeah. And so it's something where, you want that freshness and you want that drinkability. I want to be able to sit next to a pool and drink a half a bottle of this without my mouth being shredded. It's one of those things where that's kind of my philosophy on winemaking is larger vessel, if possible, oak or neutral oak being the oak signature, slightly earlier harvest, shooting for that 14% alcohol on a lot of my reds that I'm trying to do is as long as the tannin structure is there and it's not offensive, trying to highlight the fruit and really pick it when the fruit is showing best, that fruit character. Acidity, I think, is a lot of winemakers, acidity comes from a bag. They open up a bag and dump it in the tank. I think you can't replace acidity that comes from the fruit. It integrates much better in the wine. It doesn't sit on top of the wine or you feel like it on the finish or it's aggressive. It's much better integrated when it comes from a grape. I'm not against, I'm not a natural winemaker by any means. I'm not a zero intervention winemaker. But I truly believe that, if you can get the best grapes from the vineyard and you don't have to add anything, that's what makes the best wine. So being able to pick the grapes at maybe slightly earlier than most people would, assuming you have the right site. Because if you don't have the right site, just because you're picking early to pick early doesn't mean you make the best wine, right? So if you have the right varietal rootstock site, farming practices, you can do that. And the tannins are ripe at that earlier harvest point. So that's kind of my philosophy on winemaking. It's comes back to the vineyard. I'm a viticulturist at heart. Yeah. So I want the wine to reflect the vineyard. We put a lot of work in during the year and I want that to show in the wine. I don't want it to be all about oak. I don't want it to be all about, additives that come later. I want to showcase the hard work we've done in the vineyard. I want to showcase the freshness of the fruit of the site. And I want people to be able to enjoy that without having to cover stuff up, essentially, which is what a lot of new oak does, or a large oak character or acid adds or tannin adds can do. So I really do want to highlight the vineyard, and that's my philosophy. And I'm happy to work for Gloria Ferrer too, which making sparkling wines, it's all about the fruit, right? It's all about the vineyard. It's there's nowhere to cover it up. There's nothing you can do to cover it up. So you have to really embrace what you have. And I'm kind of taking that philosophy and bringing it in to our estate vineyard here at Vine Farm Ridge, and really making it making elegant wines that really highlight the site and the fruit and the character of the vineyard.
Yeah. So obviously with the vineyard, the replanting and everything, a few years until you get some fruit from it. Are you continuing to make any kind of Vine Farm Ridge wines in the
we have our small we have our small production of what we've done. My wife's working on, she's doing the business and compliance side, which God bless her, because that's that's
that bullet,
outside of my realm of expertise. And she has a degree in wine business from Cal Poly. So she actually, has more technical training in that side of the business for sure than I do. So she's going to be managing sales, operations, compliance, the business side, while I'll be, managing more of the winemaking and viticulture side. And thank God, because she's much more detail oriented than I am when it comes to that paperwork, all the paperwork involved in that. A lot of people don't realize how much goes into starting a wine brand and being able to sell wine legally. But it's a huge challenge. So, thank you, Allie, for that. You're a lifesaver. And it's like I said, we're a state grown brand. So if we don't have grapes to produce wine, I'm not going to produce it under the Vine Farm Ridge name. Maybe we'll make a little wine for funsies, for friends and family. If we find something interesting that intrigues us, maybe just to, not lose my winemaking chops and make sure that, I'm getting the experience that I need to. You only can do it once a year.
Yeah.
It's not something that, right before we make wine again, I can get a few more reps in, and so, dealing with the challenges of different vintages gives you experience. So I might make a little bit of wine just for the winemaking experience, but not anything I'm going to put under the Vine Farm Ridge label. I think that's something that is special to this estate, and I want to keep it special to this estate. Okay. I think that there's a lot of great fruit out there, unfortunately, but fortunately, for sale for really cheap right now. And if that continues next year, maybe I'll pick up a couple tons of something and play around with it and produce a wine that maybe we're proud of and can just keep practicing. And even if it just goes out to friends and family, it's still something that keeps my winemaking skills fresh and finely tuned. Keep honing my skills versus, just taking a 6-year gap and not making any wine. But it's a long process replanting a vineyard. And this property potentially could produce up to 4,500 cases of wine. So a decent, enough to run a winery off of. And, we'll have to ramp up to that. Obviously you can't make 4,500 cases and snap your fingers and sell it. And I'm sure there's plenty of wineries out there that will agree with that. The goal is start small and start building up a following and hopefully building up a wine club and people, get into some restaurants and wine shops and wine bars that really can appreciate, a family owned, organically farmed kind of ground up business, an authentic, air quotes, authentic winery that's really trying to do things right. I'm hoping that there's people out there that resonate with that. I'm hoping the price point really helps also sell the wine, that you can get awesome quality wines for a very reasonable price. What I think is a very reasonable price that are estate grown and really something special and unique. Part of the reason also why we're planting these varietals is there's plenty of Cabernet out there. There's plenty of Chardonnay out there. I love those varietals. I drink tons of Chardonnay. I'm a huge Chardonnay fan. We've got 14 acres of Chardonnay planted right behind you. And Chardonnay is great, but I'm a startup winery. My wife and I are trying to start a business here, and how am I going to compete against established wineries that have been producing Chardonnay for decades? How is my Chardonnay going to be different? I'm sure I could do some stuff, and we make phenomenal Chardonnay at Gloria Ferrer, and I'm very happy to do that. But I, as an independent business, am going to have to think about, how do I stand out? How are we different? Why would someone come to us to buy a case of wine. You know, if you're having a party, why would you swing by Vine Farm Ridge to pick up a few bottles before your party versus any number of other wineries in California? And so we really want to try and set ourselves apart and do something different and produce amazing wines, but produce something that maybe you haven't had before. Maybe you can learn something. You come, you know, I'm going to be out here a lot. And so swing by, come by, you know, say hi, you know, learn how to prune a vine, learn how to prune a vine, you know, learn how to drive a tractor. I'm happy to help you. I'm happy to teach people, but, you know, hopefully teach people some stuff about some different varietals, some different farming methods, something that, hey, not every vineyard needs to look like a museum to produce phenomenal wines. It's something I've learned very well at Gloria Ferrer, where we do our, you know, double blind grading tastings and, you know, you taste a wine and at the end they reveal what they are and you go, really? That one? That one was the one that was the A grade? You know, that one's the one? I would never have expected that. And then, you know, so, you know, just getting people used to this of like organic or regenerative or whatever words you want to use to put behind it. They're not going to look like museums. Those vineyards don't look like museums, but that doesn't mean they can't produce phenomenal wines. And in fact, they're probably better for the environment and better for you to drink those kinds of wines. So, yeah.
Anything you think we missed or that you'd like to discuss?
No, I mean, I think we went on a lot.
Yeah.
You know, no, I mean, I post a lot on Instagram. So if you're an Instagram user, you know, you can follow me at brad.thewineguy. I post stuff about our journey here at Vine Farm Ridge. I post stuff about Gloria Ferrer. My wife and I do a lot of wine travel. We travel all over the world, going to, you know, wine regions, learning stuff, tasting a lot of wine, obviously, enjoying a lot of wine. So I post about winemaking, viticulture, you know, cellar operations, everything that, you know, if you have any interest in wine, give me a follow and follow along kind of our journey. Yeah. And yeah, you can learn more about me there for sure. You know, I've got lots of stuff. So, and I try and post, you know, at least a few times a week. But yeah.
Nice. Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Thanks for coming out to Livermore, coming out to our little slice of heaven here before the vines get popped out of the ground. It won't look the same next week, but we're excited about it. We're excited it's new beginnings, you know, it's the start of a new project, start of a new, you know, new stage in our lives here. So it won't look the same next time you drive by.
Yeah. That's great though.
All right. Well, cheers. And, thanks for coming out.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to my conversation with Brad. First wines off the old vineyard are pretty amazing, and it'll be a super interesting project to follow and support as it grows. Of course, you can taste his viticultural work right now on the Gloria Ferrer wines. Follow Brad at brad.thewineguy on Instagram and look out for more about Vine Farm Ridge. You can follow the podcast on wherever you're listening and the Instagram at Indie Wine Podcast, and feel free to email indiewinepodcast@gmail.com with comments, questions, or feedback. If you're enjoying the podcast, I'd love it if you told a friend or wine lover about it and help spread the word. Rating, reviewing, or donating at patreon.com/indiewinepodcast helps too. It all goes to offsetting podcast expenses and allows for more episodes. We'll be back soon with another episode. Have a good one.